Well, good evening, everyone. I'm very glad to be with you all. This is a very interesting evening that I happen to be doing this on because this is my 9th anniversary since the first contacts that I made on these digital modes. I started off with JT65. That's before there was an FT8 or an FT4. So I went to a hamfest in Toledo, Ohio, and the speaker that day talked about this JT65. And I thought, that sounds interesting. I think I'll go home and give that a try. And I needed North Dakota on 160, and I heard this was a good mode for working stations that are hard to work other ways. I do work 5 watts all the time, so that is the situation here. And as it turned out, I didn't work Montana on JT65 first. I worked them on CW first, and then worked them on JT65 and FT8 and FT4 and many other modes later on. But at the time, I did not work the 160 North Dakota. So the slideshow has gotten really long over the years because I've been doing this for a while, so I'm going to be skipping over some parts of it. And I'm also going to be doing a live demo of FT8, FT4, and also I'd like to take any questions and try and answer any questions you all have. So keep questions in mind, and when I get to the end here, I'll be happy to answer questions. So let me just jump into the slideshow a little bit. This slideshow is available at tiny.cc/FT8FT4, or you can shoot the QR code, and I'll have that up at the end also. That'll give you access to the slideshow. There's a number of links in the slideshow there in a serif font, and they're pretty obvious when they're there, and you can click on them for outside resources. My contact information, K8ZT73@gmail.com. I also have a website at K8ZT.com. This is me in my trainman's outfit. I volunteer on a scenic railway that runs through the Cuyahoga Valley National Park between Cleveland and Akron. This is my shack. And this is me operating FT8 in 2019 field day in Delaware. Now, you probably have heard these sounds before, but I'm going to play them anyway. This is what FT8 sounds like. And there are 8 different tones being modulated at the same time, so that ends the name FT8. This is FT4. Hopefully you got all 12 of those tones there. The good news is you never have to listen to it again. It's a mode that is a digital mode that you can't decode by ear. Now, I know I can pick out my call in RTTY. That's about the only thing I think I can pick out for sure. Maybe CQ in RTTY, but other than that, these digital modes are hard to decode by ear, so you're going to let the computer do the decoding, fortunately. It's one of the fastest growing modes of amateur radio. As I said, I've been involved for 9 years now. A lot of people are just getting involved. And when you look at the growth of this mode compared to time it took to switch from AM to single sideband or from Spark to CW, this has happened in a flash. So first, who's responsible? Well, a gentleman named Joe Taylor. He's a professor, a Nobel laureate in physics. He's an emeritus professor, actually, from Princeton. And I have a link here of his bio. And as I said, when you see this symbol or this font, that means you can click on it. It'll take you out to more resources. The other people that are involved are Steve Frank, and Bill Somerville, unfortunately, is now a silent key. So when you see the FT, it stands for Frank and Taylor. That's where the FT comes from. So the quote is that you or anyone else are more welcome to submit patches or larger revisions of our code to implement features you'd like to see. So it's an open source project, and the software is called WSJTX. Now, why do I do FT8 and FT4? What's my multitasking mode? When I'm reading my email, writing, working on the computer, etc., even right now while I'm doing this presentation, I have FT8 on in the background. If I'm in the shack, there's always FT8 running. One of the nice things is it seems the bands are open more often. A couple of years ago when I first got started, I was regularly working stations on 10 and 12 meters long before the sunspots really kicked up. It also works great with my low power signal. You don't need to work low power. It's not a low power mode necessarily. It is a weak signal mode. Now, I do happen to work all QRP. No one told me when I was a novice you shouldn't start with a 2-watt Argonaut 515, and 117,000 Qs later, I'm still working almost exclusively 5 watts or less. This is my station pre-August 2023. Unfortunately, this tower came down in a storm in August of 2023, so I'm limited to my 43-foot vertical now, but this is what I had most of the time up until last 2 years ago. FT8 and FT4 allowed me to increase my DXCC, worked all states, and my total QSOs, even on bands that are less occupied, the so-called work bands and even post-work bands like 60 meters. And you can notice that some of these bands, I have a very high percentage of FT8, FT4, and JT65 contacts compared to the other modes. I was on 60 meters this evening. There was no one on phone. There was no one on CW, but I did work 2 stations on FT8, including one U Country for me on 60 meters, and that was the Fox Sierra that was on tonight. On 160, it's a great mode because 160 quite often you're dealing with a very difficult noise, signal to noise ratio situation, especially when you're putting out only 5 watts. So it's been very helpful in me increasing my DXCC totals. I haven't got 100 yet. I'm still at 67 on 160 with my 5 watts. My furthest contact so far on 160 was a ZS, 13,000 miles, a UA0 at about 8,500 miles, and probably one of the most surprising ones was North Cook Islands. I glanced at the screen and I thought I was looking at ES1, which would have been Estonia, which would have still been really good on 160. But it turned out, as I paid closer attention to what was on the screen, it was actually E51, and I worked them on FT8 and got the QSL cards. So that's the story. FT8, FT4, JT65 are one of many digital sound card modes, and I'm going to be referring to these as sound card modes. You can also abbreviate them SCM. They utilize the computer's sound card to bring in audio from your radio to be processed by software to decode the information embedded in the signal. They also do the opposite of encoding information and then sending it out to your radio. So it's a two-way communication going on between your radio and your computer, being via a sound card. Typically, there's 4 parts to a station for sound card communications. A radio capable of single sideband transceive. You don't need digital modes per se in the radio, but if you have single sideband, you're set. If you have a CW only radio, it will not work because you can't do those tones on a CW only radio. So it does have to have single sideband transceive capability. You need a sound card interface. Now, a lot of radios have that built right into it nowadays. You need a computer and you need some software. The radio acts as the same as it would during a single sideband transmission. It doesn't know it's not someone's speaking voice. It just knows it's sending audio. And that audio happens to be the tones embedded from the software. So it's really very similar to single sideband operation, much more than it is CW. The sound card simply takes the incoming audio of the receiver, inputs it into the computer's incoming audio channel, often known as the microphone input or line-in input. And the sound card also takes the encoded audio, typically known as the speaker output, from the computer and feeds it into the radio's jack. So the sound card, we talk these sound card modes, but the sound card is doing nothing but moving stuff back and forth. All the magic takes place in the computer with the software. The encode info is inputted via the keyboard. The audio signal is then sent to the radio via the sound card. On receive, the same thing takes place with decoding. So if you take a radio with a sound card or a radio without a sound card and you use an external sound card, interface them to a computer, install a few software programs, and you can operate any of these modes. So if you install WSJTX, FT8, FT4, JT65, JT9, JT4, and a couple other ones, including Whisper. If you install FL Digi, you can get some of the more traditional sound card modes and some of the newer ones. So you can get radio teletype. You can even do CW decoding and encoding. Not great, but it does the job. But you can do a ton of other modes such as PSK, Olivia, Hellscriber, and so forth. if you wanted to install one more piece of software, now everything I've talked about so far is free software-wise. This piece of software does have a cost involved. It's called the Vara software-based modem. It's a piece of software by Spanish Ham. It's $69. But once you install that with your interface computer, you can then run WinLink, Vara AC, Vara FM, Vara Chat, Vara Images. And these are used quite a bit in emergency communications. I'm not going to talk a lot about the technical aspects of it tonight, but there's a couple different ways we can key a radio for digital transmission. Frequency shift keying is what is used for RTTY. We can also do audio frequency shift keying, but they're both basically the same thing. One is just done on the radio, one is done and then inputted through the microphone for RTTY, but they're both frequency shift keying. The other thing we can do is phase shift keying. Now this is used for PSK31, PSK63, and then we can do something called multiple phase shift keying. This is used for FT8, FT4, and all these other modes of the WSJTX software. So they're actually MFSK, multiple frequency shift keying. There's other digital modes, packet radio, and others that don't use any of these modes, but we're not going to worry about those for tonight. WSJTX was originally released in 2001. It's undergone several major revisions. And really when this software came out, it came out for two main purposes, none of which are the main purposes it's being used for now, although it's still is used for those two purposes. One of the things it was designed for was Earth, Moon, Earthbound, so EME, where we had extremely low signal-to-noise ratio situations, and we would use very long decode and encode over a minute-long methods to get this information through. The other thing was for using it for meteor scatter and other very esoteric VHF communications modes. But people realized, hey, if this works so well on VHF and UHF, how would this work on HF? And that's when things really took off. And here's why. If you look at single sideband, we need about a plus 10 dB difference between the signal and the noise. That's the SNR, signal to noise ratio. A really good CW operator might be able to pull out a signal that's minus 15 dB. FT8, FT4 minus 18, FT8 minus 20, and JT65 minus 24 dB. So we have a 34 dB difference in signal to noise ratio. And remember, these are logarithmic when you're talking about dBs, they're not linear. So a huge difference in the signal to noise ratio required to get a signal sideband signal through versus a JT65 signal. They are multi-decoder. So when you use these software, it's decoding every one in a passband. So it's not just decoding one station at a time, it's decoding every one in a passband of anywhere from 2 to 4 kilohertz of radio space. And the signals are very small, so that could mean a lot of signals in there. FT8 and FT4 are not decoded at the same time, so you have to pick which one of these modes you want to decode. The WSJTX software can only decode one mode at a time, so you have to pick which one you want. There is an auto sequencing, so after the manual start of the QSO, the software takes care of everything from then on. It sends the signal report, it sends the Roger, it sends the 73. And that's really good because in FT4 you have about 7.5 seconds of transmission time and about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds in between each transmission to figure out what you're going to do. So it's good that the software does that for you. This is what the screen looks like, and this may be a slightly older version. This is 2.6. 2.7 is out now. By the way, if you're still using 2.6, 2.7 is out of beta, and it is fully available now to use. But the screens look very similar. There's really 3 parts to the screen. Well, 4 parts. There's a menu at the top. There's a band activity window, that's on the left. There's a receive frequency window on the right. And then there's all the controls below that. So when we look at some of the controls, one of them changes the frequency with this little drop-down arrow, or you can type a frequency in directly. It'll also show you the current frequency selected. Below that, you can choose what you want, what mode you want to use. FT8, FT4, MSK, Q65, JT65, and an additional add-on mode is called the Hound, Fox and Hound mode, which is used with FT8. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. You can also see some information on the side here. This little meter will pop up and down showing you how strong the signal is coming into your radio. In other words, how much audio you're feeding into the radio via the sound card. And you want that to be sort of in the 40 to 65 range. It'll be bounce up and down. If it gets in the red area at the top, you're overdriving. You're bringing in too much audio. There's some controls across the top here. The main two we're going to be concerned with is the enable and halt tools. When we turn on enable, our radio will transmit. Now, our radio will transmit only at a specific time, and I'll talk about that in a second. But let's take a look at this receive area over here first. This receive area has a couple columns in it. The first column is the time. The second column is the signal to noise ratio of the station you're hearing, the station you're decoding, I should say. The next one is the difference in time between your clock and that person's clock. We'll talk more about that later also. And then this fourth area is the relative frequency above this. So this, if it's 865, that means that the person is at 14.080865. If they were at 19, they'd be at 149.4900. So it's just the difference between that frequency and where they're exactly at. When we look at the signals that are being decoded, you might see two stations or you might see one station. If a station is calling CQ, of course, they're not in a QSO, so they're the only station. And the software will mark it in this green color to show you that they're calling CQ. There'll be the CQ, the station's call sign, and their 4-digit grid square. And the software is smart enough to figure out where the prefix is at and tell you which country it is also. But when you see two call signs, the call sign on the right is the one you're decoding, the call sign on the left is the one that they're talking to. So this is not us decoding DL2, this is us decoding F4 HPX, who is decoding and talking to DL2. So we can't work anyone on the left side of this screen here. We can only work the stations on the right because those are the ones we're decoding in the two-way conversation. And you might ask, well, Anthony, you can't work either one because they're working each other right now. Well, I'll explain how we can get started on working them even when they're working someone else without interfering at all. Some stations are in gray. That means we've worked them before. And because we're only going to be able to exchange 14 characters, there's not a lot of reason to talk to them again. You really only have enough space for call signs, grid squares, and signal reports. A couple other things on the screen. You're going to see some other controls in the middle here. You're going to see a station that we're talking to if we are talking to someone in this area. Down at the bottom, you're going to see this turns yellow when you're transmitting, and it turns back to another color when you're receiving. Down at the bottom shows you which mode you're in. It shows you which radio configuration you're using if you name them. Otherwise, it'll just say default down there. And over here, we have our exchanges taking place, the various messages. And we're going to send these messages in order depending on what we're replying to. And I'll go through all of this in more detail. I'm going to skip over the video. You can watch the video on your own. Let me just talk about what you can do with this real quick, and then we'll jump into actually getting started with it. It took me 66 days to get my worked all states with FT8 with my 5 watts. It took less than 2 years with FT8 to get worked all states on 8 bands, and I'm now at 10 bands worked all states. I'm missing two states on 6. Took 122 days on FT4. Why the big difference? FT8 is actually a more powerful, more effective, but FT4 came out, and when it came out, a lot more people were using it than when I started using FT8. So think about that for a second. A brand new mode comes out, and in less than 122 days, I have my worked all states on that brand new band, that brand new mode. Here's some numbers for different bands, DXCC wise, worked all states. So you can see I do not have worked all DXCC on 160 or 80 currently, but I do have it on 30, 20, 17, 15, 12, 10, and I don't have it on 6 yet. Now, I'm very close to having it on 40. These are my DXC totals only for FT8 and FT4, not for CW or phone. And these are the total number of QSOs. And you can see that I'm at 32,000 QSOs in my 9 years I've been doing this. So I average a little over 3,500 QSOs per year in the 9 years I've been doing it. And these are the percentages of contacts per band. And of course, just like most of my DXing and most of my operation, a lot of it takes place on 20. But I have a full 3% on 60, and I probably have less than 1% of my phone operation on 60 meters. This is just a chart, and this is old. These are the countries that I worked on FT8 and FT4. It's now at 290 countries, I think is the current total that I have confirmed. And this is my worked all states. You can see the two that I'm missing. I'm missing Alaska and Hawaii on 6. I've worked them on CW or phone, but I've not worked them on FT8 or FT4 yet. These are CQ zones, the 40 CQ zones. As some that I have on all 11 bands. There's some that I have on 10 bands. And then there's some which are very difficult from here, such as 34, 26, 27. You can see I only have a few bands that I've worked in those cases for those. And that's pretty much the same way that my single sideband and CW totals look for these zones, because those, of course, are the hardest zones here from Ohio. Much easier for you probably for zone 26 than it is for me. This slide was originally created when 10 and 12 were pretty dead before the sunspots kicked up, and I wrote an article for our local newsletter. You can click on this link, but it talks about the fact that you can work 6, 10, and 12 even when there's very little sunspot activity. Another good thing about FT8 and FT4, because of that ability to work with those low signal to noise ratios, it means that you can get by with a poorer antenna, lower power. So if you have HOA limited indoor temporary or mobile antenna options, they will work a lot better than it will with phone to make contacts. Also, the magnetic loop is a wonderful antenna. The problem is when you're using it on phone or CW, every time you change frequency, you have to sit there and retune it. And you have to move yourself out of the way after you retune it to make sure everything is okay. So they can be a little persnickety when you're QSYing. Well, the good thing about FT8 and FT4, once you get on a band, you stay in the same place. You don't have to retune. You can sit there and work all day on that band and never have to retune. 160, again, I said with my very modest sloper, I had just a single wire sloper and my 5 watts. I had over 2,600 QSOs on 160. Even with my vertical now, which is very poor on 160, I still can make contacts on 160. What can it do? It can do automatic logging into an ADIF file, so you don't need to worry about writing anything down, although I do have a friend who insists on hand logging all of his QSOs on FT8 and FT4. He just enjoys it, I guess. You can easily transfer this log to any other logging program, upload it to Logbook of the World, EQSL, Ham, Club Log, etc. It also lets you know how strong the stations you are in dBs. So you actually get a real signal report instead of a 599 all the time. And it works with almost any single sideband radio, including VHF and UHF. And there is some activity on 2 meters and 440, mostly during contests, but it's there. What can't you do with FT8 and FT4? You can't rag chew it. 14 characters a shot, even if you want to rag chew, that's going to be like talking 2 words and then shutting up for 15 seconds and saying 2 words and then shutting up for 15 seconds. There is an option though. A piece of software has been used creating the same open source background that FT8 FT4 uses called JS8 call, and it's a keyboard to keyboard chat mode. So it uses the same technology, not quite as effective because it doesn't work at the same signal to noise ratio because it's not sending your call 30 times every time you answer someone. But it is good. MPSK31 is another way if you want to do keyboard to keyboard real-time chatting. It works. You cannot work without a computing device. Now this is no longer true. There are some radios that now have the ability to decode FT8 and FT4 right in the radio. In the case of the Zygu 6100, there's new software firmware created by R1B, I can't remember the rest of his call sign, that actually does the decoding there in the software. And there's a new little kit out that basically does all the decoding in a very simple plug-on computer. So it does have a computing device built in the radio in these cases. Doesn't work with a CW-only radio, and you can't work a station without an operator. What do I mean by that? I'll show you in a second here. Some other myths about FT8 and FT4. The first myth that's really common is a lot of people think these modes require an internet connection. They do not. Now, part of the reason why people think this is you have to keep your clock very highly synchronized, even more synchronized than Windows can do on its own. So you need to use some synchronization software, but you only need to do it every couple of days. So if you lose internet capability, it's no big deal. And there is a way around that. You can use a USB dongle and get to the satellites directly that way. And once you get GPS signal, you can update your clock. I was operating in Delaware for that field day, and there was no internet even on the property, and I worked for a whole week. Well, every couple of days, my time would get a little bit out of sync, so I would drive 3 miles over to the McDonald's, go through the drive-thru, get a milkshake, and resync my time, or pick up a pie. But I now have a little dongle, so I can do it with the GPS, but I don't get a milkshake out of it. There is operators required, and if no operator skill was required, everyone would have 300 plus countries immediately, and there is skill involved, and I'll talk about some of the things involved. Another myth is that there's no home brewing or kits for digital modes, and there certainly are, and I'll talk about a few of those. And another myth is that only new radios can be used. A lot of people think because a radio doesn't have a built-in sound card interface, it can't be used. You could use almost any radio that can do single sideband. You could use an old tube radio that can do single sideband and work just fine. I'll give you an example here in a few seconds. Now, I mentioned before that you need to have someone at the other station, and that brings me to the story of the one that got away on 160. Antarctica, I heard DP0GVN coming in at -6, I'm sorry, not coming in, but they were hearing me at -6 dB. And this is a piece of web resource called PSK Reporter. It tracks stations' reports of the stations they're decoding, not just the stations they're working, but all the stations that are being decoded. And I was being decoded for almost 20 minutes at -6 dB, plenty of signal strength to be able to work me. Unfortunately, the radio was sitting there by itself. No one was sitting at the radio to come back and work me. So this is the one that got away, and this is what I mean, that you still need an operator on the other end. So here's an example of using a 1972 radio. This is an Argonaut 509 running FT4. I used a little sound card interface, and I mocked up a little thing to tie everything together in a little box here, and I certainly didn't do it neatly. I had to tune the radio manually, but once I got the radio tuned in, it worked FT4 just fine. By the way, if you're interested in the Ten-Tech Argonauts and other Ten-Tech gear, it's been a passion of mine since I got involved with my original 515. I have a whole presentation, and you can watch the video. You can go to the slideshow called The Odyssey of the Argonauts. So if you're a Ten-Tech person or an early QRP person, I think you might enjoy that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to see if there's any questions first before I talk about what you need to do, how to set up, and all that. So any questions or comments? Okay, well, I'll answer them later. So I said you need a radio, a computer, a sound card or sound card interface, and some software. In addition, you need a way to key the radio. Now, most of the time, if you're using a radio that has built-in software, you're going to be using cat control with it, and you can key it through the cat control. You could also use a radio's Vox, or you could even manually switch it on and off if you wanted to. And I tried that with my 10 Tech, but I didn't really need to because I used the switching capability of the interface that I was using. You could even sit there and manually flip a push-to-talk switch each time you went to transmit if you wanted to, and it would work. Now, depending on whether you have a sound card built in or not, will determine what you're going to do next. All the radios on the left are all under $1,200 or under $1,500, and they all have built-in sound card capability, including something called the QRP QDX for $69 kit. There are a few radios that are either currently being produced or just recently stopped being produced that for some reason don't have sound cards in them. Probably the most common one that you're going to run into now is the Yaesu FT891, a great little portable radio, but it does not have a sound card built in. So if you want to do that, you're going to need an external sound card. The ICOM 718, a radio that I've never really cared for because I had to play around with one for a while and wasn't real excited about it. It doesn't have, and I think it might still be available, but it might be discontinued. I'm not sure. There's also some radios that don't need a sound card, but they don't have one built in, but you can feed it directly into your sound card of your radio, or you can use an interface if you want to. So this is the QRP Labs. This is a QDX is a single band. You pick which band you want. I'm sorry, a 5-band or 6-band. You pick what set of bands you want, and then you can operate the digital modes on those bands. It's a $69 kit plus a $20 case, or you can buy the whole thing assembled for about $109, I think it is. There's also a newer radio out. It's called the QMX. This is also from QRP Labs. This is digital only. This is a CW transceiver, and it also does digital. And as of this week, the beta software is out, so it does single sideband now also. So if you're wondering about the QMX series, the software is now out to do single sideband. It is still in beta though. This is what that radio looks like inside. This is the QDX, and there's no display on the front. And on the back, there's a place to put your antenna, power, and a USB cable that connects to your computer to do the decoding. By the way, the WSJTX software is available for Windows, Linux, and OS X. You don't really need that fabulous of a computer. Most computers will work fine. I have used it on a number of things, and it works very well. WSJTX is free. JT Alert and Alarm JT are two programs that are helper software. They're also free. And the third piece of software is actually online, and that is PSK Reporter. I'll jump out and show you what that looks like real quick. This software takes all the stations that are being decoded and tells you, let me rephrase that, all the stations that are decoding and also have an internet connection. So this is done via the internet. This information is being gathered via the internet. So these are the stations that have heard me, and I was on, when was I on? I was on 60 minutes ago, 3 hours ago, and you can see that different stations around the world were decoding me. It doesn't mean I worked them or they worked me, but they were decoding me, and they were giving that information out. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So you might need some cables. This is where you can click to get the software. This is the user guide. You do need to set up your radio so it's interfaced to your computer. And the first thing I want to suggest you do is make sure if there's driver software that needs to be installed, get that first, install it before you attach any cables. Also, make sure you know what the baud rate of your radio is set at. Most of these radios have menus and you can change the baud rate. Doesn't matter which baud rate you choose, but you need to know where it is. You also need to determine which COM port the radio is using on the computer. And if you're already running something like N1MM or other logging software, you've probably done all this and you're all ready to go. So that's not an issue. The sound card interface is going to be the only thing we're going to need to worry about. As I said earlier, it depends whether it's built in or not. Here's some examples of external sound card interfaces. This is currently my favorite. If I was buying one today, this is a $49 one plus the cables, and it works just as well as all these other ones. Actually, I think it works a little bit better, and it is tiny. It's about as big as your thumb. It's called the DigiRig Mobile, and there's cables available for it pre-made, or you can build your own. MFJ had something that was out there for a while. Signal Link has probably been by far the most popular one for a long time, but there's other ones out there also. In some cases, you might be able to get by just using a sound card and plugging it into your audio input and your microphone input and your speaker output from your radio. Take a look at some of the information before you jump into that. Let's interrupt this for a little bit extra geekiness real quick, talking about things. This is a video. I'm not going to play the whole thing right now, but this talks about the basics of sound card interfaces. I'll let you read that on your own later. This is also an article by Jim Brown, K8ZT, about interfacing your radio. Another really good article. You can read this. These are also information on home brewing sound cards if you want to home brew your own sound card. Here's even a kit you can pick up on eBay for $9. Is a sound card interface. Here's another kit you can buy. This is a presentation. It was done at Contest University and a couple other places by Bob, N6TV. This is a must-read even if you're not interested in FT8, FT4. If you do any interfacing of computers and radios, this is something you want to read. It talks all about legacy PC ports, USB to serial adapters, using the device manager in Windows, changing port numbers, etc., etc. So definitely, if you do any interfacing at all, you're going to want to read this, or you can also watch the video of him presenting it at Contest University in 2021. I like to operate in multiple modes, so whenever I'm sitting here, I usually have WSJTX open. I also have my regular logging software open, and quite often, especially on weekends, I'll be doing a contest also, so I'll have my N1MM open. What's the problem? Well, my radio only has one COM port. This software, though, will let you use that one COM port for 3 or 4 or even 5 different programs at the same time. There's versions for the Elecraft suites, for the Elecraft K3 and K4, for ICOM equipment, and for Yaesu equipment. It's by VA2, I forget the rest of its call. I think it's BQ, but I'm not sure. These are really great programs, and you can see that it gives you the frequency, but then it also shares all the ports. But you can also, this is also good if you want to do remote control of your radio. You can also use a virtual audio cable to feed the audio from something like an SDR into the software, and I have information on that here. Back to our regular presentation. These are slideshows, YouTubes, written documents on how to interface various radios. So if you have a radio and you're not sure how to interface it, take a look on YouTube, do a search, and you'll probably find all the details you need for your specific radio. I'm going to skip over a couple of these real quick. You need to install the software, and then you need to configure it for your radio, and I'll actually show you all this on the radio, so on the actual software. The one problem that you're going to run, the most common problem I run into with Windows setups is the default sound card designations for the speaker or the microphone get changed. You do not want your sound card audio, either input or output, to be the default Windows device. The default Windows device is the one that plays the YouTube video. When you play the YouTube video, the one that the sound comes out of. You don't want that to be the same one as your radio. So you want to make sure that the default is set as the actual default device in the computer, and not the USB audio codec, which is in this case the sound card from the radio. Unfortunately, Windows has a bad habit of, when they do upgrades sometimes, of switching default drivers, so that's one of the more common problems that people run into. If you all of a sudden start hearing sound coming out of your computer instead of out of your radio, that means that your default driver has been changed. These are more resources on setting up different radios, very specific ones. I did one on the Elecraft radios when I first started doing this because I wanted to help people out, so this is the K3S. You also need to run some time sync software. The one in Windows won't do it. The one in Linux will. I don't know about. I think the one in Macs will also keep it synchronized properly. If your time gets off of sync, then you'll start having problems decoding and other stations decoding you. I'm using Dimension 4 now. I used to use the Meinberg. You can use any your favorite software. I'll come back to this. Very important. Once you get everything set up, always make sure that you always have your radio connected and turned on before you start your WSJTX software. If you don't, it's not going to find the radio, and it might just decide it wants to pick another port or something else. So always make sure you have your radio turned on and interface before you start the WSJTX software. If you have multiple operators, you can set up multiple WSJTX configurations. If you have multiple radios, you can set up multiple WSJTX configurations. So I have actually 3 different setups for different radios that I use. You can also copy it to another computer by installing it and then copying just these files from one to the other, and that will automatically configure it for the new computer. There's information on having a second user on the same computer. Okay, this slide looks a little bit busy, but this is the slide I give a lot of my friends after I help them set up. Read this slide before you call me is basically what this slide is. When you're having problems, check the computer sound card settings, especially after Windows updates. Make sure your time synchronization is working. Make sure the radio's bandwidth is set completely full. You don't want to narrow the filter down. Completely different than the way you operate CW and phone. You want to hear as much as you can hear and let the computer sort everything out. You got to make sure the radio's in the correct mode. By the way, this is the only digital mode for the most part that uses upper sideband. Most of them, like RTTY, use lower sideband. So make sure you're on upper sideband, or if your radio has a data mode or something like that, a digital mode, use that. Make sure you're in the correct mode. If you think you're operating FT8, but you're really operating FT4, that makes a big difference. Are the 3 boxes checked? And I'll show you those 3 boxes, but you want to make sure that these 3 boxes on the software are always checked. The hold frequency, the call first, and the auto sequence. If not, things work a little bit different than you think they're going to. And there's also a special operating activities modes, and you only want those selected if you're actually working in one of those modes. And then finally, the last thing is the radio working on other modes. I get calls, and then it turns out the one person, their antenna was broken. The coax had fallen off their antenna, and that's why it wasn't working. If they would have tried any other mode, they would have had the same lack of success. So I'm going to skip over these slides because I'm actually going to show you on the radio, but I do want to point out this one slide. These are the 3 buttons I want you to make sure that you have set up all the time. You want to make sure that the hold transmit frequency is checked. I don't know of any reason you would not want that one checked. You want the auto sequence checked. If not, you have to choose which report needs to be sent, and it's hard to do. And then the last one is there's a little drop down called CQ first. You can choose any of the 3 options, but don't choose the option of no. No means when you call CQ and someone answers you, no means you're not going to answer them. Well, you do want to answer them. Why are you calling CQ? I don't know why you wouldn't want to answer them, but I had a friend had everything else set up right, and he says, I can talk to people if I call them, but when I call CQ, no one ever answers me. Well, there was hundreds of people answering him. He just didn't know it. So make sure you have those 3 checked. The next thing you need to do before you actually start transmitting is find an empty spot on the band. Just the opposite of the way we tune everything else in. Normally you tune in the station you want to work. Here we find a spot where no one is. That's where we're going to transmit. And I'll show you how all this works in a moment here. But I'm going to just show you real quick here these different readouts. Here's 2 stations talking to each other. We can work the DL8, but we can't work the JE1 because we're not even hearing him right now. Oh, and I forgot to mention one other thing that's real important. Everyone starts transmitting at the same time. Everyone stops transmitting at the same time. A minute is divided into even and odd segments. On FT8, the first 15 seconds, actually the first 12.5 seconds, half the stations are transmitting. Then there's 2.5 second sessions where all the computer's decoding everything, and then we go into the odd section of transmit, and the other stations transmit. So you either have to be on even or odd. You can't be on both, and if you want to work another station, you have to be on the opposite time as them. So if a station is working on even, you need to work on odd if you want to work them. If you're on the same time as them, you're going to be transmitting at the same time as they are, so you'll never hear them. And I'll actually show you that. So here's an example of me calling CQ. You can see it over here on this screen. I'm calling CQ. I've been doing it for a while. And this station answers me. And when it answers me, it turns red on my screen. So here I'm calling CQ. The station responded to me, K8ZT. This is W8SIC. I'm in Echo November 91. I sent back W8SIC. This is K8ZT. You are plus 12. That's his signal report. He sends back K8ZT. This is W8SIC. Roger, minus 10. That's my signal report. I then send him WSIC, K8ZT, Roger, Roger, 73, and I'm done. And I actually stopped this too soon because then there would be the last line would be him sending K8ZT, W8SIC, Roger, Roger, 73, and that's the whole QSO. And this just shows it on this side too also, but it's the most action is taking place on this side once we actually make a contact. Okay, let me just buzz down through the rest of this. Let me just mention this real quick. There is a couple different ways that DX stations work. Regular FT8. There's also something called MSVH FT8. That means they're transmitting on multiple frequencies, they're transmitting multiple signals on the same band at the same time. This means that they can be working 4 or 5 or 6 stations at the same time. This is something that only DX stations do. There's also something called foxhound mode that they can do. And this is foxhound mode. When they're operating foxhound mode, you're going to see multiple stations in one line. That means they're working foxhound mode. Now, they can also do MSVH and foxhound at the same time, so you'll see multiple transmitters on multiple lines because they're operating both of these modes at the same time. You only need to worry about hound mode because you're not the fox. You're the hound that's chasing the fox. So you need to be in hound mode. And the way you do that is you go to the menu, you go to File, Settings, then go to the Advanced tab, check the box that says Special Operating Mode, and you choose the hound button right here. Now, if you're operating field day, you do the same thing, but you don't choose hound, you choose field day. If you're operating a VHF contest, you do the same thing, but you choose the VHF contest. And you might have to put other information in depending on whether you're working a contest or not. You need to think about reducing the power on your radio. If you have a 100-watt radio, you don't want to run 100 watts because it's a continuous duty cycle mode. You're transmitting for a full 15 seconds, and your radio could very easily overheat. And by the way, 40 watts is plenty of output power to work almost anyone in the world on FT8 and FT4. With any kind of decent antenna. You can work a little bit, you can run more power if you want to. I'm not going to tell you how much power you want to run, but I'm also going to tell you that you don't want to burn your radio up. Also, make sure that your radio's bandwidth filtering is set for the maximum bandwidth. On my K3, it's 4 kilohertz, so the radio is only going to 2.8 or 3. Set it to wherever maximum your radio can do. Turn off all speech processing, noise blanking, digital noise reduction, etc., etc. You don't want any of that. I mentioned the PSK reporter. The first time you transmit, you can easily see whether other stations are hearing you within a few minutes, even if no one answers you, because you'll show up on PSK reporter. But you do need to make sure that you do one thing first. And, oops, I clicked on the wrong button. Let's move on while we wait for that to go away. Let me close that real quick. Okay. The way you use PSK Reporter is go to File, Settings, and make sure that you go to the Reporting tab and just make sure this Enable PSK Reporter spotting is on. That means that your computer will be sending information to PSK Reporter every time you're decoding, even if you're not home. If the radio's on and you're decoding, as long as you have this checked, it'll be sending out every one you decode the PSK Reporter. Skip over that real quick. Okay, I'm going to show you all these things. Okay, so let's actually take a look at it. There's a couple parts here, and I'm also going to have another couple pieces here. So this piece over here on the left and this piece at the bottom is actually the JT Alert helper software. So this part here is the WSJTX, and this is the band map for WSJTX. So the first thing I do is I choose which mode I want to operate. Let's say I want to operate FT8. I can also choose the band I want to be on, and this little drop down lets me get to the right spot on the band automatically. The frequencies are different for FT8 and FT4, but the good thing is they're right on here. You just choose the drop down and it'll give you the right one. So I'm on 20 right now. You can see there's some activity going on. Don't worry about these extra purple colors. That's because I'm using this JT Alert software, and it's telling this software to give me a purple alert that I need that for DX Marathon. Okay, all these green stations are calling CQ. Notice this one has a 1.5 here in red. That means that his clock is a lot different than my clock. With only one station being in red, that means it's probably that station that's the problem, probably not me. If there's a bunch of them in red, then I got a problem with my clock. Now, the buttons I showed you before, hold, transmit frequency, auto sequence, and I have my set at maximum distance, but you could also do first. Just don't do none. There is another button here called transmit even, transmit first. If you have that unchecked, you transmit odd, transmit second. It doesn't matter which one you have. Now right now, because I'm not transmitting, I'm going to copy both of these because I'm not transmitting. So right now, this section that was just transmitted, these were the odd people. These are the even people. So if I want to work with these people, I have to transmit on odd. If I want to work with other people, I need to transmit on even. Now, I don't even have to worry about that if I'm answering a CQ, because let's go down here on the band map. I found a clear spot. I'm going to set that by right-click, and I'm going to say set transmit and receive frequency. That's where I'm going to transmit. There's no one else there. I don't want to be where any of these other stations are at. I then look at this chart here, and I can look at all the signals going by, and I find one with a very high number. I double-click on him, and it will automatically turn on my transmit, and it will send his call, KI5 NVM K8ZT EN91. He's transmitting at 906, so he's actually, this is his signal down here. One of these two on the band map is actually his signal. But it doesn't matter. He could be here, he could be up at the bottom, he could be at the top, as long as I'm not on top of him. If I would have this whole transmit frequency button unchecked, when I double click on him, it would automatically change my transmit frequency to his transmit frequency, and I'd be transmitting on top of him, potentially. So we don't want to do that. We want to leave that button checked. Now, I may or may not work him because he's pretty low. He's -7. I'm using my vertical. It's almost the end of the day for 20 meters here. We are running a 5K today, unfortunately. But let's try another station. We'll just pick someone else here. We'll double click on this KD4LQW. Now he's transmitting at 659, so this is him right here. And notice this green little box jumped on him automatically when I double clicked on him. And I think I might have someone underneath me here. I want to move my signal. So I'm just going to simply come up here and move to a different spot. There's no one there. And now I'm going to transmit. And I will keep transmitting for 8 times, or I will get him. And if I don't get him at the end of 8, it will time out, and then it will stop transmitting. If he answers me, we'll be able to see it real quick here. And he's still calling CQ. Maybe. We'll see whether he answers us. We're listening right now for 12.5 seconds. You can see right here, this little bar going across. And now we're gonna decode, and he's still calling CQ, and he's +4 here, but he's not hearing me. He may not hear me. I'm gonna go ahead and switch bands here. Now right now I'm transmitting, so we're gonna wait one more time. I'm gonna transmit for 12.5 seconds. I'm going to disable my transmit though, so unless he comes back to me, I won't turn that on, and that means I won't start transmitting again. But we'll see whether he answers me real quick here before I leave. Gotta wait another 10 seconds. Nope, he's still calling CQ. So I'm going to switch to 40 meters. So I'm going to come down here, drop down to 40. We're going to have to wait a few seconds because we need to see where everyone's at. Because again, it's a new band map. Notice I happen to be right on top of someone very loud. I'm going to switch down here for now, but I got to wait another cycle. Nope, there's someone in the next cycle right there. So let's find an empty clear spot. I think this is a good spot to be in. And we'll let the stations fly by and see who's there calling CQ and who is strong. Now this JT alert is this helper program lets me see the same thing in a little bit better way to view it. So you might be able to see the stations there a little bit better. So we're going to take this one station that's a +6 in Texas. We double click on him, N3AZ, and I'm going to be transmitting right now. You can see it's yellow. Now, notice you're not hearing anything. I could turn the volume up. I'm transmitting right now. He answered me, by the way. He sent me a -5. I sent him a Roger +9. I'm transmitting. Now I stopped transmitting. The radio's decoding. And now he's transmitting and I'm listening. And I just made a mistake. I just bumped my transmit button. So I was transmitting all the way through that. So hopefully we'll get it cleared out here. So I messed up that in the middle by bumping my button there. We don't need to hear anything, though. That's the nice thing. So the fact we don't need to hear anything means that you can operate this mode remotely with anything that you can log into your computer from remotely. You don't have to send the audio across the lines. You can, as long as your radio and computer are somewhere operating, you can easily jump in that way. Okay, now he just answered me with the 73. We're all done. It pops up. I log him, and that's it. So we've just worked that station. I'm sending him my 73 right now, and we're all done. So questions?